Welcome back. We are well and within the second hour of the show, and this is where we're going to be focusing on a story that has dominated the world overnight and perhaps even defined the limits of power in real time. Just 90 minutes before a self imposed deadline to launch devastating strikes on Iran, Donald Trump pulled back. The United States of America and their president announced a 2-week ceasefire that halted what could have been a very, very catastrophic escalation in the Middle East. For days, I think we've all been following. The rhetoric had been quite apocalyptic, if I can put it that way. Warnings of annihilation, threats to target Iran's critical infrastructure, and the real possibility of a multi-front regional war involving Israel and the United States against Iran. But overnight, the calculus shifted a bit, and we're going to be unpacking all of that, and we're going to be doing that with Dr. Ali Alsayegh, who's joining us via virtual platform. Doc, thank you so much for joining us. Always a pleasure having you on Salam Media. Really appreciate you giving us your time.
Thank you, Salilo. Good to see you. Salam alaikum.
Walaikum salam. And I think we'll jump right into it. Just your quick analysis of what we know and the events of yesterday. We all waited with bated breaths. Us in the Southern Hemisphere barely got any kind of sleep because we wanted to see in real time what was going to be unfolding. But it looks like Donald Trump blinked in the last hour of that ceasefire deadline that he said himself.
Yeah, we all didn't have a lot of sleep last night because we were stuck to the TV screens trying to understand what was going to happen. And from last night until today, don't get me wrong, the strikes from Iran on the Gulf still continued. The ceasefire is still not in effect completely. I think that they have not agreed specifically to a time for it to start, or the other explanation is that the orders for the strikes against the Gulf to stop have not reached the lower echelons of the IRGC that are responsible for attacking the Gulf. And I think this is a very huge and unexpected moment in this war. And it reflects that Donald Trump did not actually have a smart plan to annihilate a civilization. It's part of his way of over exaggerating things. But I have a lot of question marks around this because reading the 10-point plan from Iran essentially shows a solution to the conflict that means the end of the illusion of US hegemony. We're talking about the US recognizing Iran's sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz, where they're able to put $2 million fees on every single ship that is passing through. If after this war, or right now, ships go back to the same flow rates, we're talking about around 100 ships passing through the strait every single day. If we add that up, that's around $3 billion per month. That is a lot of money. Sorry, not 3 billion, $6 billion. Those fees are going to be cut to Oman, but I'm sure that Iran will get a larger part of the cut. They're asking for US military bases to be closed and for the US soldiers to leave. They're asking for reparations. They're asking for sanctions to be lifted. They're also asking for demanding rather that frozen assets are returned to Iran. We're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars and a sustainable source of income. This is a major economic and political win for Iran. There is something amiss, I think. This is a huge blow for US empire. And if we understand anything from history when it comes to empires and how they fall, they don't usually fall so peacefully. They fall very violently. They try to take down as many targets as they can with them before they ultimately fall into the abyss. So I am very cautious at the moment. I wonder whether Trump just accepted this to relieve some of the pressure on the economic market until he and Israel can kind of recollect themselves and strike Iran again in 2 weeks' time. This
Mm.
is a worry that I have. I am by no means wholeheartedly optimistic about this being a premonition to a final end to the war.
Mm. You mentioned some very, very important points. The fact that this looks and feels like maybe for now a win for Iran because of the demands that they've made and ultimately how they have self-preserved. I think the United States went into this war thinking, in a few days it'll all be done and dusted. There'll probably be insurgency in Iran, and the current regime would be ousted by the populace, but that didn't happen. People rallied in by the proverbial flag. People showed a lot of patriotism. Do you think, from a United States point of view, that's where they quote unquote lost the war, when there was no clear, defined strategy of how to win, and most importantly, what was the win from a United States perspective?
I think for the United States, the win was to carve up Iran into different spheres of influence. They knew that they couldn't really defeat the IRGC or cause regime change. Maybe they had some whimsical ideas about people going up and creating an uprising against the Iranian regime during the strikes, which proved to be fallacious. I mean, if you read history, even when there are radical opposition against the regime, when an outside power tries to invade Iran, they tend to kind of unite. And we saw this in the Iran and Iraq war. And certainly, I think the moment where the United States realized that they were losing is not necessarily when, for example, they tried to push the Kurds to enter into Iran with weapons, and that failed, but when they realized that they could not really open up the Strait of Hormuz. Trump thought that he could allow it to be closed, help his oil lobbyist friends get profits in the United States, which they did, and then at some point reopen the Strait of Hormuz militarily. But obviously, as someone who's a real estate person, he's a businessman. He doesn't know much about military strategy. His advisors around him, I don't think, have that much knowledge on military strategy as well, and they have variegated interests. And so he was left flabbergasted that he could not open the Strait of Hormuz, and he needed to, because if the Strait of Hormuz doesn't open, this will inevitably lead to world economic collapse and also a huge challenge to the petrodollar. So he needs this 14-day ceasefire without a shadow of a doubt, in order to kind of recuperate, I think, economically, possibly also recollect himself militarily. But the issue is, like, even as this is happening right now, the Democrats in the United States are moving to try to remove Trump from office using the 25th Amendment. The opposition in Israel, the leader of the opposition, Yair Lapid, is saying that Netanyahu, this is a catastrophe for Israel, and Netanyahu needs to be removed. And if we know anything about Trump and Netanyahu,
he said
yes,
Netanyahu was a failure. Yes,
indeed. And if we know anything about Netanyahu and Trump, they are trying their hardest to hold on to their political positions, because after they lose their positions, their freedom is not necessarily guaranteed. There are lots of different ways that the opposition can ensure that trials move forward, and they can essentially challenge Netanyahu and Trump and take them to jail. And when you have those types of personalities in power, they tend to want war to continue in order to hold on to their political status and position. So this makes me very, very pessimistic, unfortunately.
How significant would you say the role of Pakistan in mediating was here, and just generally the role that they've played as a quote-unquote mediator? And does this almost signal a shift in global diplomatic influence? Countries like Pakistan, traditionally, you wouldn't see them as peace brokers between juggernauts like the United States, like Iran and Israel.
I definitely think Pakistan played a really important role here. It's they're gonna definitely take this as a win, at least preliminarily, and if this turns into a lasting ceasefire, an end to the war, I think Pakistan will hear about this legendary mediation process for a very long time. I have a couple of questions myself about the role of Pakistan because interestingly they were kind of balancing between their mediatory role as well as their commitments to Saudi Arabia in their security pact. You know, on the one hand, they were mediating between the United States and Iran. They played a very important role in making sure that Trump doesn't commit to escalation immediately. You know, putting forward proposals in order to kind of calm down the situation and keep the talks going. But simultaneously, they were also announcing that if Iran continues to target Saudi Arabia, they will have no choice but to side with Saudi Arabia if Saudi Arabia decides to respond to Iran. Was this a way in which they were creating dual avenues of creating that motivation to engage in those talks? I'm not sure. This is something that definitely needs further analysis right now and in the future. But definitely, I think Pakistan need to be given their due respect and appreciation for the mediation efforts that they put forward.
Most definitely. Just in closing, you mentioned that in the Middle East there was a lot of tension. You didn't get much sleep as we did in the rest of the global South. Just give us a sense of what the situation is looking like right now. What are the reactions coming from the Middle East, Doha, specifically to this announcement of this 2 week ceasefire? What do they make of the news?
I think first of all, it came as a surprise to many people in the Gulf as well. When you look at Kuwait, for example, the Ministry of Interior made an announcement telling citizens not to leave their house between nighttime and morning time today. The In Qatar, the Ministry of Education announced that they they were going to give a or they are giving a holiday to students not to go to school from school to university, not to go to their educational institutions until next Sunday. We all were in anticipation of things getting worse,
Mm,
right? At the moment, the reactions I think are positive. They are Many people are relieved, but still cautiously, I think, optimistic, and that feels like what the climate is right now. I think what is important to bear in mind is that regardless of however this goes, in order for the Gulf to continue safeguarding its interests, especially when it comes to the passage through the Strait of Hormuz, even also the safeguarding the livelihoods of civilians. There has to be they have to come together really as a unified force with a unified economic policy, foreign policy, defense policy, in order to have stronger weight to throw around in the region, acting like a unified bloc when negotiating, for example, with Iran. If, for example, when the negotiations end up with the United States accepting that Iran will put a $2 million fee on every single ship, that is something that the Gulf can negotiate with Iran, but they are better doing it as a unified bloc rather than individual nation states, I think. So that is something that is in the air, I believe, when it comes to the decision makers. They are thinking about this in as a kind of plan moving forward.
No, most definitely. Dr. Ali Alsayegh, Jazakallah so much for chatting to us. Always a pleasure. I think it's going to be a totally different world after this, and I'm sure you and I are going to be talking more often than not, but going to be different now. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Salelo. Great to talk to you.
There you go. That was our Middle East politics scholar, Dr. Ali Alsayegh, helping us unpack a very, very dramatic night where the world literally stood on the brink. I think we got, 2, 3 hours of sleep trying to track all of the developments that were happening out in the Middle East, the United States of America. And then all of a sudden, Donald Trump stepped back. A 2 week ceasefire is now in place between Iran and the United States and Israel. And we're going to continue to follow the story, continue to get reactions from different parts of the world to get how everyone is reacting, whether it's the markets, whether scholars and people that are in the politics, diplomatic spheres. What do they make of it? Very, very unprecedented. The Middle East and the Gulf, as you hear from Dr. Ali, was preparing for an Armageddon scenario, but thank God that didn't happen. So yeah, we'll continue to be tracking the story. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, still keen focus on Donald Trump and him blinking first when it comes to the war out in Iran that he started with Israel. So we'll continue our broadcast right after this short break.